Okay, well, I'm ready to call the meeting to order. Can we have roll call, please?
Quisenberry. Rosales.
Here.
Schwartz. Here. Hartke.
Here.
Kibler.
Here.
Maxwell. Here. James.
Here. Have a quorum. Next, I'll entertain a motion for approval of minutes.
So moved.
Are we going to do them as omnibus or we take them separate?
Omnibus.
Okay, that's what I needed. So we got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Okay, next we need approval of agenda.
Move the agenda, Mr. Chairman.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Next, we got public participation. Seeing no public, we're moving right on to communications. Does anybody have any communications? Seeing none, I'm moving on. Next, we're going to have the facilities, I almost said Phyllis, Facilities Director report, and he'll go through his items here, and then he'll take time to take questions from us.
The first thing is the parking lot repairs. I think you've all seen the memo. When I first came out with the estimate for the repairs, what I did was I got a price from one of the vendors for a square yard price, added 10%, multiplied that times what was needed. When his first quote came back, it number one was for the price he gave me was for a 3-inch repair, and his quote came back with a 6-inch repair, and it was a little bit larger area. Plus, it had a mobilization fee of about $2,500. So his quote came in at $25,000. When I called and asked him about it, his explanation was that it needed a 6-inch patch as opposed to a 3-inch patch. The second quote came in. I was hoping for something a little closer. It actually was at $30,000. And when I talked to the vendor about that, his reply was that, yes, a 3-inch patch was good, but he thought it was about 3 times the area that needed to be patched, plus the seal coat and the painting. The third vendor, when he came in and came to look at the lot, I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, you really don't want to put any money into this because you have to mill this down and overlay it in about 3 or 4 years. So I said, well, I need a price anyhow. He gave me a price, but unfortunately it included a slurry mix, which I'd been asked if we were going to use, and I said no. So that really wasn't anything that was of any use. So in going back and trying to get an apples-to-apples quote on the parking lot repairs, one of the gentlemen that came back said that, it's the 1st of October. We don't plan anything past the middle of October, so we can give you a price on the patches, but not on the seal coat and the painting. So at that point, it was pretty clear to me that we were kind of pushing things and rushing it. I just didn't feel comfortable going ahead and spending the money on something that I wasn't really sure about. So that's why I've suggested that we put that on hold until the spring. What I'm hoping is, I can look at the parking lot and I can tell you that, this crack needs milled out and patched, and that a seal coat will take care of these cracks. But as far as the substructure damage, I don't have the ability to determine how deep of a patch it needs. So what my thought was, I could talk with people at the highway department, maybe some of the engineers, and they could give me a little more detail on what we actually need to have done. So that's why it's where it's at.
Mr. Rosales?
For us lay people,
Yes.
could you explain what a slurry seal is?
It's an oil-based mixture that has a lot of sand in it. The good thing is it really gets in and it seals, but the problem is on a parking lot, the turning of the wheels actually grinds down on the surface quicker. It's used more for, I believe, highways than parking lots.
I see.
Any other questions? I guess I would just point out, when we start looking at the budget and maintenance items, as I've said before, when we get estimates, that's all they are, estimates. We never know until we start to tear into the work where it's going to end up or come from. And after speaking with Kirk, like everything else, the longer it goes, the more it deteriorates, and some of those things we can't see because it's not surface damage. So we need to be mindful of that, and we do need to keep up with it. And so Kurt's looking at all his options, and he'll come back to us, but it may be one of them things that it's going to take a little bit more money than we thought. Rosales?
So if it's less than $25,000, he doesn't have to come to us? Or if it's more than 25, and then that's when he needs board approval? What is the total amount?
Well, I think we had set the budget, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it at around? Yeah,
It was 15, and that was. in the
15?
yeah.
So I would come back with anything above that.
Okay.
Maxwell?
I'll just say I'd be glad to help you any way I can. I think, looking at the parking lot, we're talking a lot more money than what you're thinking about right now, or what we are thinking about. There's two ways of doing it. Try to just get by, and that's what the approach that you're suggesting. The other is to fix it so that it lasts for a long time. And it's going to take a lot of money, and and we have this several lots. So it's going to be a major effort over a long period of time to try to get these lots up to where they need to be. And again, if I can help, I'll be glad to help you.
Appreciate that.
And I guess I would say that once it's done, and one thing that I've spoke with Kirk about is that when we do this, we also need to have a mechanism to review them in a timely manner and keep up with them and have money set aside to maintain them. My estimation, and I'm dealing with the same thing Kirk is right now, doing some quotes for parking lots. I sent out 8. I got 1 back because of the time limit. But they generally told me about every 5 years a parking lot, especially because of what he just said, the turning and the snow plowing and what have you. And that's something that we've lacked in is preventive maintenance. So spending money is good if you get the product, but then we got to be mindful of the future boards do that always have some money set aside to keep up with it. Rosales?
So currently, we don't have a feasibility plan in place so that we could look at all these parking lots and says, well, parking lot A needs $15,000 of work. Parking lot B needs a whole new resurfacing area, which might cost $50,000, and maybe we cannot do it this year, but we could do the $15,000 job versus the $5,000 job. I'm not quite sure how many there are. I'm not quite sure what the budget is like, but I would imagine if we had a schedule, we could say, well, today, this year we want to be able to spend $30,000 on resurfacing our most needed parking lots and then move forward on those.
There isn't necessarily a program in place, but we're moving towards that with like the roofs and all the equipment that we've come up with so far. And the parking lots will be added to that. We currently have a line item, I believe it's about $10,000 for maintenance upkeep for the parking lots, but that barely covers painting 1 or 2 of them a year. There's not enough in there to cover all of them on an annual basis. The problem is at this point, we've gotten to where things have deteriorated enough that it's going to take quite a bit to get it brought back to where that normal annual maintenance will be of help.
Now, would this budget come out of the same budget of the demolition of the building that we're ready to demolish partially, which is
Leah's building.
the Elias building? Is that the same budget line item?
Not in my budget, not in the public
They're
properties
separate
annual
line items.
budget, yeah.
But I would just add too, that they did supply us at a couple of meetings ago or a meeting ago, a list of all the parking lots and what they considered the ones that needed major work at this time and that needed work, and then some of them that are gonna be needing work. It's just they didn't go in depth into it. They just more or less gave us an overview. And Kirk and Alan put that together and it was in one of our reports. But it's something they're gonna study even deeper, but like everything else, with duties, we need to tell them this is what we need them to look at and focus on instead of chasing their tail all day long on other items.
Yeah, the reason I asked is that, we were getting something down concretely for roofs, just
Right.
for roofs. And I know that the board did not approve the $600,000 that we had set aside for property maintenance. And so I was wondering how this all would play into effect if we don't have those funds and things need to get done in a timely manner so that they would not progressively deteriorate.
Well, I guess I would just respond, if I may, is it will do like we have on other issues. We'll have an emergency, we'll have to fix it, and we'll have to pull the funds from somewhere, and then what we do is we either cut staff or we do other means to get the money. Good answer?
Yeah, I'm still concerned about the mortar and the expansion joints on the courthouse, which is, I think, $350,000. So, all these figures are being thrown around, and, I need to weigh which one is really more important, prioritize in the list of funding that we have available for this year. And for me to approve or not approve or size up what really needs preference first is a little hard to determine.
Well, some of those items, Mr. Rosales, like the courthouse, they have a construction fund already set aside for that, so that doesn't come out of this other fund that we're looking at for the monies that we're requesting now. Some of the repair work was estimated by Alan and Kirk on the chillers and that's the new budget coming forth. And yes, that will be a concern, but the items we're talking about now, like the Elias building, the parking lot, some money was already budgeted and set aside. I'm sure that Ms. Busey can probably speak to that, but we'll probably try and roll some of that over.
Yeah, the courthouse project has been approved and is moving forward and actually came in much lower than the projected estimate of $304,000. So that's moving and that's coming out of the courthouse construction fund. This committee already prioritized primary building equipment systems and roof replacements, sent it on to the county board, and that is what is in the facilities budget for next year. It's documented what you prioritized as the issues that should be dealt with first. The funding was cut somewhat, but all of those projects had budget estimates, so whether and what they actually cost remains to be seen, but this committee will be apprised of each of those projects as they move forward, because you'll have to approve bids for us to move forward with, awarding and taking on those projects. So you are in the process of prioritizing those. The $15,000 that we just transferred into the facilities budget for the parking lots, depending on how this proceeds, we may ask to re-encumber those funds in fiscal 2014 because they will not be spent in fiscal 2013. But again, there's additional, as Kirk has stated, you haven't really prioritized parking lots because we don't really know yet enough about the parking lots to give you a recommendation. So I would say that will be another issue that will come back to you at some point in the future. So I understand that you're doing these, you're not getting one big capital infrastructure plan. You're being presented with issues within a capital infrastructure plan, but you have been provided with the information and you have already prioritized to a great extent at least what should be focused on in next year's budget. And that $532,000, it was originally $750 with $150,000 for future reserve. That future reserve went away in the budget meeting last week, and the $600,000 that was identified was cut back to $532. But again, we don't know exactly what those projects will cost, how much of those projects we might be able to obtain grant funding to help and provide assistance in paying for. So the $532 is a fairly solid starting point for the equipment and roof replacements that were identified for next year. The parking lots are not addressed in next year's budget, other than this $15,000, which we could re-encumber.
So what I am understanding is that we do not have we do have a budgetary constraint, but the major constraint is a time factor because winter is setting in. So therefore, the $15,000 that was going to be allocated to parking lots for this year would have to be transferred for next year and possibly added on to at least another 30 or another 50 so that we could do it correctly so that we won't have to spend $100,000 doing parking.
Yes,
Okay.
you're absolutely right.
Okay, I understand.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, go on, Kurt, with the next one.
The next item is the timeline on the demolition at 1701 East Main. We're planning on this fall doing the design. IGW is working on the design during the winter, going out for bids and starting the demolition in the spring. We're currently looking for the asbestos report on the east part of the annex from 1998. I found the documentation for a quote from a company to do that study. I've found the minutes where it was approved, but I can't find the study itself. I think originally the study was for the east side because that's where they were going to put the addition for the ARD unit. And actually, it is on the west side now, so I don't know if maybe at the last minute that wasn't done. Anyhow, before we do demolition, because of the Clean Air Act, we have to have an asbestos study to determine how much asbestos is there and what impact it will have when the building comes down. Also, if we're going to recycle the concrete and the material within the building, we'll have to make the determination whether we need to abate it first before it can go to be recycled. So I've gotten one quote for $600 to $700 for the price. I've got a couple calls into a couple other companies, one that had just done some work at Rantoul to see what it would cost to get that study done. I did walk the gentleman from PACA through the building. There are some items they're interested in, doors and handrails and things, and I don't see any reason, unless you give me one, to not go ahead and have them go through and take those items. I did talk to them about signing a waiver, just because of the health issues that they might run into. They did not think that would be a problem.
A hold
So-
harmless,
What's that?
a hold harmless
Yes.
waiver.
Yes. So I'll work on getting them in there and get that taken care of. I do want to get a firm quote on an abatement price if that's what we have to do, if that's determined that that's what we have to do to recycle the concrete in the building. So we're moving forward. It's just moving forward a little slowly.
Any questions, Mr. Rosales?
By when do you think the demolition will actually conclude?
Depends on weather, sometime late spring, I'm assuming.
Late spring?
Yeah. It kind of depends on the weather. If we don't have a lot of snow and the bids come back, I'm sure we'd want to get on it as quickly as possible, but I'm not, depending on the weather, that'll be the biggest issue.
So demolition will not start this year, it will start early spring.
Yes, sir.
I see.
And Mr. Rosales, part of the problem is because once they knock that down, we have to encapsulate the opening.
There's still two halls that,
Yeah, because if you're working in the dead of winter, you've got a lot of cold air blowing through there, and government bureaucrats don't like cold air.
they'll also have to
Cinder
cap,
blocks.
they'll also have to cap off the steam lines. And
I
that'll
see.
need to be done during decent weather.
Okay.
So there are some other issues.
Any other questions on that one? Here, Patsy?
Yes, I have a question. Has there been any analysis done as to the cost of this project and the cost of building some storage space that the sheriff has requested for things connected with the satellite jail? I mean, this is 5,000 square feet of space, and has there been any discussion at all of using this 5,000 square feet of space for the storage that the sheriff is looking for?
Well, Patsy, I don't know what Kurt's going to tell you, but I think that was part of the agreement in the lease, that they had asked that be torn down or removed due to some health hazards in there. And I would strongly suggest that if we're going to go in there and remediate some of the issues that we're talking about that we just heard, we're going to spend a heck of a lot more money than what it's worth. And then Kurt can answer your question as far as any cost comparisons.
There was Alan, I don't have the figures with me, but I know Alan looked into it. Part of the problem is the roof needs to be tore off. There's actually two roofs there. Before that would be any kind of viable space. There would also be, there's mold all over the place. The heating and air conditioning would have to have some work done to it. Even for storage, dry storage, you still need heat. I can't remember the price. It was close to $700,000 or $800,000, I believe. So I'm just throwing that figure out. I can't tell you that that's exactly what it was, but it was in that ballpark, I believe. And I can get that figure for you if you'd like.
Well, I was just curious. We don't seem to have a comprehensive plan for the use of buildings and spaces. And when Cal gave his report, that's what some of what he was talking about, and that sort of triggered my thinking on this. And remediation of what is in that building does not have to be that expensive because all it needs to do is be sealed. I'm not talking about tearing it down. I'm talking about reuse of the space.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item.
Courthouse exterior maintenance, the contracts have been signed by Autobahn. They're here waiting for Al's signature. We're still waiting for a pre-construction meeting with Autobahn to set up the timeline. our hopes are that we can get in and get the cleaning and sealing done yet this fall, and then do the repair work on the west side in the spring. But the first step is the pre-construction meeting, and hopefully that will take place the first part of next week. But I'm just waiting for IGW to let me know about that.
Any questions? Rosales?
Are we using any of that foundation money that I think there was 50,000 placed on the facilities foundation fund that was donated or contributed, which was money left over from the building of the tower and of the
Are you
building?
talking about the clock tower money?
Yeah.
That money's strictly for the clock tower. That has nothing to do, now, we were looking at some lighting for the clock tower at one point, that we were looking at that money, but it's mainly gonna be set aside to keep that clock running and keep that tower in the condition it needs to be kept in.
So these repairs are not on the clock tower, they're in the new building?
They're on the whole building, on the one side that he just alluded to, but yes. And they're normal routine. I mean, these are things that we've discussed at length, that when the bricks are shifting and your mortar joints expand and other things occur, and you've got a lot of traffic, bus traffic, other traffic on that road, and things shift, and if we don't reseal them, you know, it's like anything, you're gonna have water penetration and other issues. So it's something that needs to be done on brick buildings.
But preferably, since we would like to leave that money on reserve, right? Even though the damages or that we're gonna be repairing are in the clock tower, and those funds were for the clock tower, we're not using those funds specifically for the clock tower. We're using it for the entire building, both the new structure and the clock tower.
Well, the construction fund, and I'm rambling on here, Deb could probably address it. The construction fund is money that was set aside when the construction was done, and it's been sitting there, and it's used to do these type of things on the whole courthouse.
Yeah.
The clock tower money that was donated or given to us in a will has specific things that it can be used for. And if it's justifiable, yes, it will be used, but it doesn't cover treatment such as this.
So this treatment is not covered under those specifics
No.
or specifications?
No.
But lighting
And
is?
that was in her will, and we do not want
I
to
see.
go against somebody's
Okay,
will.
Sure. Could enjoy the
Does that
lighting.
explain it, Mr. Gibson? Thank you. Anything else on that? Any questions? Patsy? Okay, we'll go down to the next one.
I just wanted to touch base. I went to a workshop put on by Illinois Energy Now a couple weeks ago to hear what energy incentives were out there. I think Alan had kind of told you about a few of them a while back. I just wanted to touch base again. The things that they're offering are boiler tune-ups, money for reset controls, parallel positioning controls, missing pipe insulation, steam pipes or steam traps, and low-flow spray nozzles. And I'll kind of work my way through this a little bit. The reset controls for the boiler is basically what that is your boiler water temperature can either run at a certain temperature all the time, or through a reset, which offsets the water temperature depending on the outside air. Typically in this area, when it's 60 degrees outside, you keep your water temperature at 60 degrees. When it's below 10 below, it's closer to 210 degrees. So rather than keep 180, 190 degree water all the time, it saves energy. The good thing is all of our boilers that would qualify for this incentive actually have that reset control, and we've had it for quite some time now. Parallel positioning controls. This is a fairly new technology. It's something that comes out in all the new boilers. Our older boilers actually have a set ratio for combustion air to gas. It's via jack shaft between one valve and the other. So when the boiler comes up to low fire, the gas valve opens, the air valve opens at the same amount. As it progresses through to a high fire, it keeps that same ratio all the way through. The parallel positioners, what they do is they're actually independent controls for both of those valves. It actually looks at the boiler efficiency, outside air. There's 3 or 4 variables that it looks at, and it actually varies the ratio depending on those properties. The people I've talked to, they're pretty expensive. I talked to Mr. Kadame from the DCEO, and he said that not very many people utilize that technology on older boilers. Number one, it's a wireless technology. Number two, it's expensive, and the cost payback is only 1 or 2%. I'll look at that a little bit more, and I'll try to get some prices to see if it's viable, but from everything I've heard, that's not really something that's taken advantage of much. Missing pipe insulation, we actually have a couple pieces of pipe. The problem with using this and one of the others is that you actually have to pay an outside contractor to come in, make the repairs. You pay their wage plus their markup on the supplies. And I actually have guys who can, go down and buy the insulation cheap and put it on. We only have about 2 or 3 pieces, maybe 20 or 30 foot that's missing at the downtown jail. So again, I don't know if that's a viable option. Low flow spray nozzles, we actually have collected all we can of those. We have them in place at the satellite jail in the kitchen and the nursing home kitchen. And then the last thing, the boiler tune-ups. In 2012, we have 7 boilers that actually qualify for this incentive because of the size. They have to be a certain horsepower or above. We have 7 that qualify. We had the efficiency levels checked. Of the 7, 4 of them were already at 80 to 85%, which is where they try to get them to, 85% efficiency. The other 3, we had the tune-ups done in May. It increased the efficiency anywhere from 1 to 7% on the boilers. It kind of depended on whether it's high fire or low fire. Most of them, the higher percentages were at the high fire. We're still waiting for the check. We sent the paperwork in. We've talked to them again. Hopefully the check will be getting here in the next week or 2. We spent a little over $5,000 to have the work done, $5,343. The incentive is $3,355. So actually the cost of increasing the efficiency was only about $2,000, which was, that came in helpful. So we are hoping that, like I said, we're hoping that check will get here just in the next week or 2. So I am going to the Illinois Green Building Association Summit next Tuesday, actually, and hopefully I can find out some other opportunities then. So,
Any questions? I have one. Kurt, with these boilers that were done, is there any way that we can measure any energy savings as far as fuel or the amount of consumption, or no?
not really. I mean, we can look at the gas usage. Obviously, in the buildings where the boilers are, gas is mainly just the boilers or the hot water heaters. So it's not like you're not trying to pull the figures out of a building like this for electrical, where there's so many electrical devices. I can look at it, and I can look at heating degree days, cooling degree days, and see if I could pull that out, but I don't know that it would be a very accurate figure.
That's where I always, when I hear about energy savings or some of this new stuff, like Kurt said earlier, if I may, is that you have to take into account, I've gone after some grants in the past, and there are some grants out there, but the time you spend, and like he said, if you have to hire an outside contractor, because that's part of the rules that go with the grant, you've really got to measure out all that, and is there money savings to you in the long run? So that comes into play, and I think when we hear about grants in this room, as I've said before, we got to realize it takes staff time. I don't know how much time you've had in this or Alan's had in this, but when we have a plate full of items that need looked at or normal everyday work, and we don't really have the staff to do a lot of that, we have to be mindful of not putting too much on our staff that takes away from the duties at hand. I mean, I know just for a fact when he's talking about the parking lots or anything else, the courthouse, if you're an on-hands type person and you're out there, it takes numerous hours to make sure that everything's being done the way it needs to be done, and you've looked at every item possible, much like we just heard about the parking lot and the substructure underneath it. So grants are fine, and I want this board to look at them, but I also don't want to spend a lot of time chasing after them when they're not really going to save us money or really help us in the long run. Any questions? Okay. Next item. Other business. I've spoken with Mr. Maxwell, and he has some thoughts that I think hold some merit, and I'm going to let Mr. Maxwell have the floor on that.
Thank you. Just some ideas and some suggestions. I was looking at these facilities. The chillers and Brookins are $159,000 each, we've estimated. Looking at the satellite jail hot water heater is $56,000. And then there's the another water heater somewhere for, where's that one at? Oh, $46,000 in the juvenile detention center. These all lend themselves to sort of a common project type thing. The chillers, if they go down, we're probably going to have to hire an architect engineer to replace them. We're not going to be able to just go down to the local hardware store and buy one and set up there on the roof. So it's going to take some revamping of the roof. So what I'm suggesting, maybe with these kinds of projects, including the satellite jail hot water heater and the juvenile detention system, which they're all going to require engineering, suggest that maybe we might head in that direction. And I think we've got some hoops to jump through, and I've talked with Deb about it. I think it makes proper sense for us to get the new facilities director on board. It makes a lot of sense to get the new deputy director of, correct me if I'm getting the title wrong, of finance on board, and have those folks get a little comfortable in their positions. And we'd originally talked about developing a list through the QBS process of several engineers and architects that we could draw from. Develop that list. That's going to take some time to get those requests for proposals or requests of qualifications out and get that list developed. And once we have that developed, then maybe we want to head into a project and get a design, let's say like the chillers. Get that design on the shelf and make an application for a grant. I think that gives you a grant, gives you a package in hand that you can have a good estimate of what it's going to cost, and get the grant application submitted. Now, granted, there are deadlines for various types of grants. We might miss a deadline, but might get it to hit that deadline the following year. Our chances are, who knows? We just have to try. But we can't really make a good application until we have a set of plans to go by. So that's my suggestion, and I would at least like for us to at least think about it and maybe start off in that direction, and possibly even include the hot water heaters at the two facilities. I realize, and I don't even like spending money on engineering either, but sometimes it's appropriate to get the plans on the shelf, have them available, and when money comes available, you'll be all ready to go. Or if a chiller would go down, you'd have the engineering done, and you could act almost immediately once you went through a bid process or something. So that's the idea, and would like to hear what the rest of you think about it. Thanks a lot. At least I would.
How do you propose, sort of piggybacking off what Stan was saying, when staff is so preoccupied doing everything else, propose to go ahead and include this into a agenda item, do a cost estimate, and have a checklist of comparisons, or like even what Ms. Patry said, a comprehensive list of to-do items so that we could begin moving forward. Do you propose perhaps sitting with Stan and Deb Busey and Kurtz to create this list so that we could begin looking at it holistically? So it's not just piecemeal here and there when necessities come in and there's no funding for it, and then nothing gets done, and then exorbitant amount of money is thrown after bad because that should have been done 20 years ago. So I'm just thinking these are great ideas, but how will you propose to move forward from where we are today when you had a neglected board that has not taken care of its buildings in over 20 years?
Well, I think what you're talking about would be an overall needs study, and we have talked about doing that. What I'm working with here, Geraldo, is a developed list already of the things that seem to be essential, and start working on that and try for the grant application. Now, by hiring the engineer to do this, we're going to relieve some of the staff time that way. Well, they're going to be able to develop the plans and even possibly help somewhat with the grant application. hopefully the new folks that we're going to get on board here in the near future will also be able to do a lot with the grant applications. And as far as developing an overall list, it's going to take a need study of the entire system. And again, that's probably going to have to be done by some sort of a consultant. Thank you.
If I may, I'm one, I don't hang my hat on grants. I think that the study, as far as what Mr. Maxwell is talking about, and when I conferred with him on it, we're looking at some major items. And those chillers, where they set, like he said, the roof's going to need reconfigured and that. Basically, whenever we do a major job, we hire an A&E firm anyway to go in and do the legwork and the research and tell us exactly what's needed and how we're going to have to do it, much like we did with this demolition that's coming up. I think what Gary's suggesting is that we know it's coming up. These are estimates. We're finding out that sometimes our estimates are not on board. We're 50%, 75% off the mark, maybe. I think if we can get these studies done, and then we could use them as leverage when we go for a grant, because just like when they did the boilers, there was things they had to research and do, and there was some testing, if I remember right, of the water temperatures and what have you. We would have that. I don't know if that's necessarily bad money, because we're going to have to spend it anyway. I think that it's something that would sit there and we'd know as a board that, woo, were we off on this 100 and some thousand, now we're up to 200 and some. Plus the A&E firm should know the latest and greatest technology that's out there. That's what their job is, more so than our staff. So those items is what he was pinpointing. The other items is something that, since I started on as facilities chair, that I was working with Alan and I am with Kirk, and they're doing due diligence to it, but we're trying to come up with an overall picture per building need and major items, and then we're going to get to the wish list, such as chairs and furniture and all that other stuff. But it takes time because it hasn't been done, and they're limited. I keep stressing this. They're limited in staff, and I would much rather staff be working than sitting around, and excuse my phrase here, pushing pencils all day. You know, there's things that need to be done. And so I commend them for that, but I know the stress level. And like I said, we can sit here all day. We sit here and then we go home and then we go to our regular jobs, some of us. But they got to work with it all day and get their other job done. And we need to give them that. And it's going to take steps. Hopefully it'll be done within 3 years. I'm not looking at 10, but it's going to take time to get it all formulated and get it together. It's not going to happen overnight. As we all know, Rome was built in 2 years, but this isn't going to be done in 2 years. Does that answer your questions, Mr. Rosales?
Go ahead. I've had the floor most of the evening.
Go ahead, Mr. Rosales.
No, the reason I'm being the devil's advocate, I think Kurt has really done an excellent job in trying to save money and be cost efficient and energy efficient. And many of the things that he spoke about tonight regarding, the standard 85% efficiency is on, reducing the faucets and the chillers and the temperature that the water gets heated to maintain those furnaces, I think is all good. But we just had a proposal on cost effectiveness and efficiency proposed by Josh that was really shot down by this board, which was not very expensive, which would save us money in the long run. And I was just questioning the fact that if we do a needs assessment and we perhaps should write it into the job description, because I know at the university we have this little caveat that we write at the end of the job descriptions that says, and other needs as assigned, that we could assign to these new facility director and finance director to go seek out grants and seek out possibilities to save money in the long run on these facilities. But I think when you're talking about engineers and you're talking about architects and you're talking about creating a list of qualified business QBS, and you're talking about getting consultants, to me it's ka-ching, 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 ka-ching. And I don't think this board is ready to approve any of that, because we have failed to approve any such other measures that have been proposed. And I remember Josh getting upset, and you stand calming them down, saying, hey, but it still passed, and we're still moving forward to it. And it probably will save us money in the long run, even though I know that Kurtz is doing an excellent job in trying to be cost-effective and cost-efficient. But I think if we're going to get new people on board, perhaps Deb could rewrite the job description to include many of these things so that we won't have to go outside of our purviews or tax those employees that we already have that I think are taxed by the things or the wants and the needs of this board or of this committee. I think, you know, the administrative staff has a better handle to know what needs to be done at what time and what is a fair marketable price. So that's my criticism in a sense, Max, that it all sounds great, but to me it's money, and I don't think this committee or the board will approve any of that. So I would hate for good energy to go after bad because it ain't gonna fly.
Josh? Microphone.
Just a general comment, I like being proactive, so I think this proactive plan, but again, I think Mr. Rosales makes a good point on costs. I would like to see where this could go, though.
And if I may, Max, no, like you, on that energy study that was being done, that was some of my questions to that gentleman. He doesn't give us some of those figures that we need on what is this valve producing, what is the temperature here. Based on the discussion I heard and what I took away from that was they're gonna come in and they're gonna look around the building, they're gonna talk to employees, they're gonna look at our lights, they're gonna look at our thermostats, they're gonna look at wall switches. I could do that for you, but I'm not going to. You know, if we wanna pay that, that's fine. They aren't gonna get in depth. They're not gonna crawl up and look at the chillers. They're not gonna stick testers in there and tell us, yes, this is operating at 85% efficiency. The thing that Gary brought up is something that we're gonna need. We're gonna be mandated by law to do some of it because it's county-owned buildings. We can't send a staff person out there that doesn't have a degree, is not an expert in the field, to say, here's the best design for this. Now, if Kurt's to go out there and fix a window, he can do that. He can tell us the gutters are plugged. He can tell us that, yes, you got a wall falling in out here, but you think Kurt's got the equipment and the manpower to set a wall back up and mortar it in place? No. And because of state laws, and I'm just saying this to you nicely so it's easily understood, we have to have an engineer. We have to have an architect, just like when buildings are designed. And I go back when I first came on this board, and Mr. J remembers this. We were wanting bathroom doors here in this building. Simple matter. They could have hung it in no time. But because it's a county-owned building and because we fall under some ordinances here in Urbana, we had to hire an architect. That bill went from $200 to $400 up, if I remember right, to $4,000. That's where that comes into play. I don't like it no more than you do. That's the law of the land. We can't circumvent it. We can cry all night. It isn't going to help it until you get into the state Senate. But Kurt, you're right, he's doing, and this thing what Gary's talking about, just like we heard about the parking lot, we thought it was a simple matter in some aspects of digging out some bad areas, filling them back in with patch, a deep patch, 3 to 4 inches, and then resurfacing. Well, we found out there's other issues going on, and it's been gone so long that we have cracking, spider cracking, so we got to get underneath there, and we may end up having to mill it down and put a good, because why spend $30,000 and 2 years later you're right back to square one, where if you spent $50,000 or $60,000, you've got a whole new thing for 5 to 6 years. Will it last for 6 years? Like I tell everybody, there's no warranty and stuff like that. The earth moves, the sun bakes a little hotter next year, but at least we know what we're getting up front. And that's why with his suggestion, I'm in favor of it, because it gives us a better handle of cost and newest and greatest technology. When we toured the nursing home, and I'll be quiet here in a minute, we saw they had put in a new heater boiler. It was a third of the size of the other ones. Now me, if I'm working here and that's what I see every day, guess what I'm gonna go look for and buy? But the engineer came in and said, whoa, we can fit this in here, same amount of pressure, a little less water all the time, going back through it, but it's saving us a lot of energy, and that's why we need these folks to tell us. Plus, we go for a grant, we've got our ducks in a row. So I'll stop. Kurt, you want to respond to any of that? No. Thanks. Max?
I did want to make a couple points, and you've hit on them pretty well, but I did want to say that part of the instructions we would make to our prospective engineers that this project will be designed with state-of-the-art, most energy-efficient set of equipment that we can reasonably put in there. You've probably heard me here complain about the engineering fees. I don't like to spend engineering either, although engineers are wonderful people, I can tell you that, but I don't like to spend the money. But and I can tell you in my experience over a long time, you need to get your engineering done. You need to have your plans on the shelf if you want grant money, because grant money is funny and fickle. Sometimes they'll have an Illinois First program or something come through. And those folks that have plans on the shelves are the ones that get the money. So this is another reason why it might be a good idea to invest a little bit now, a little bit. It's going to be substantial, but at least get your engineering done for the chillers and be ready and try to make a grant application for those. And possibly, if there's a program comes along, we might be able to capture some of those funds.
And Gary, if I may, I think your logic was with the list you talked about, if we're going to have an engineering firm, instead of piecemealing it, because anytime you bring more people back, you have cost, because they travel cost, meal cost, what have you. He was looking at a package of basically the same items that they could look at and work on and give us an idea. And we're talking about, since it would be something new, Gary's concept was that we would open it up for quotes. Deb? Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two quick questions, Gary. I like the idea. I like the proactiveness of it. Ballparking it, what is the cost estimate for this type of measure?
I still think you're looking around 18% time you get it done. I mean, that's what we're finding out on these other projects.
So 18% of, I assume, two chillers at $180,000 apiece, is that what we estimated?
Yes.
So you're
100
talking somewhere around $30,000 to $40,000 roughly?
That's very possible, yes.
Okay. In the event that we don't have this on the shelf, I'm just curious, with that sort of maneuver required and engineering effort required, what is the fastest feasible time if we had to replace a chiller that we could actually get it done, assuming we had nothing in place? And what would this save us if we had it in place? How much time would that save?
I'm just going to go a little bit by what we had to do over to the nursing home to replace that hot water heater. We had to actually hire an engineer, which we already had, so we wouldn't have to go through that process. But I think we've about, if it gets above a certain amount, we're probably going to want to hire an engineer. So you'd have to go through that process. And I don't know how you're going to speed that up much more in a month. I mean, that would be really pushing it, but you might get an engineer on board in a month. You might get a design in a month. Again, it might take a little longer. Bids, you might be able to go out on an emergency. I'm not sure about the bidding process, but if you had to go to bids, you're looking at another 6 weeks. So you're talking between 3 to 5 months, maybe. Deb, maybe help me with that.
And if the plans were in place today, how much time would that be shrunk by?
Probably 3 or 4 months.
So you basically save yourself 1 to 3 months worth of time.
That's correct.
Okay.
But you also are able to make a grant application with those plans. I think after the fact, it's pretty hard to get grant money.
Let's see if the government is open.
I think that Gary's idea is a really good one, and I just want to offer a suggestion that you might want to consider when it comes time to do that RFQ under the QBS system. I believe QBS allows you to pre-qualify a number of engineering firms or architectural firms. And I would suggest, rather than doing an RFQ for a specific project, we might want to do an RFQ to pre-qualify a couple of engineering firms and architectural firms. I've heard frequently complaints that we keep using the same architect and the same engineer, and I get it. if we used this process and we pre-qualified more than one, we could look at their particular areas of expertise and experience and use the right one without having to slow down a project by having to issue an RFQ to hire an AE at the beginning of each project. We could kind of blanket it, and I think you can do this for a period of 2 or 3 years, where you would say, these are the firms that we have pre-qualified and that we will work with, on these various projects over this period of time, so that you can share the projects among the various firms, particularly if they're local firms. You can choose the firm that has the best expertise, and you don't have to take that extra, 4 to 6 weeks to select a firm when you're getting ready to do a project.
If I may add, the thing I liked about it is, let's say a chiller did go down, which we've had that in the past. We already have our estimates. We already have our binder together. And if there is a grant that is notified through our county here, through the facilities, then they're one step ahead. They've got all the paperwork in row. They're ready to apply. They're right out the gate. We're going to have to do it anyway, and we'd have a better handle on cost. I don't know how good a study's good for. I'm not into that field. I would say at least a year or longer. And I go back to the grant money, like Kurt said, we got the grant money on the boilers, but the check still isn't in the bank. But when the bill came due, I think the county had to pay it. So again, I don't always hang my hat on a grant, but if that chiller goes down this winter, and we're talking about some of this equipment that has a long use and life to it already, and they're able to fail at any, like this building here, I've heard nothing but complaints all the time about the heating and cooling system here. And if we had this study, we're one leg up, and I'm not saying do it tomorrow. It was something Gary brought forth, and I think it holds a lot of merit, and we ought to keep the discussion going and think about it. If anybody else has any suggestions or any different means, then we'll look at it. Mr. Rosales?
I think it's an excellent idea, Gary, and thank you for bringing it up. My concern was just monetary. We did have all the consultants, and we did have all the engineers, and we did have all the architects, and doing everything right. We still came out terribly wrong on that nursing home, because I remember those vents and those ducts were downsized. They were the wrong vents, the wrong ducts. I walked through that building, it's still leaking. The roof ain't done, and there still needs to be done a lot of work. So even though all of that is in place, we still could do horribly wrong. So we have to be careful throwing good money after bad, and not overseeing actually what's being done and oversighting a lot of these architects and engineers. So I think it's an excellent project. I just don't want to overtax our staff that's already overtaxed, underpaid, and overtax basically the county board for budget when we don't have it, when we don't even have $30,000 to finish the parking lots.
Nobody said staff was underpaid. Any
I
other
think
questions?
That's what the union tells me.
So that's what we're looking at. We'll keep that on the burner. Hang on a minute. I see a hand. Ms. Petrie?
Indeed. I do thank Mr. Maxwell for his suggestion, but I would like to push it a little bit. The concept is fine, and certainly would have come into play with the ARRA money, because those who had plans on the shelf got first pick at that money, so that argument has merit. However, it still doesn't look at a overall plan for the county. You're talking about a hot water heater for the satellite jail. Well, that's all well and good, but in the same line, we're also talking about what we need to be doing to the satellite jail, even if it's short-term, and putting up temporary walls so the women can move over there. So this shifts already hot water usage and needs in that jail. And if in fact, then the next step is that we expand the satellite jail, and then we put this boiler in. So we need to go up one further step and look at a system analysis of what we are doing with the buildings on this campus before we get to this next step. The second thing is, I would really like to see what IGBA brings in before we do this. It is true they're not taking temperature readings of the boilers, but they are going through and systematically look at our building and to see what are some of the needs that we will have and we will be facing. And third is, it's not just any engineer. We need an engineer who is a civil environmental engineer who really looks at the complete energy efficiency of whatever the equipment is that is being looked at and is being evaluated, and then suggestions on what is the best equipment for us.
If I may, I thought that study, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, was just being done on Brookins.
We were starting with just Brookins, yes.
So it's not all our buildings, Patsy. Oh, well, you made that comment. And the other thing about your comment that I would say, that's why we never move forward. I mean, granted, I would love to, I've heard a lot of comments, that everybody'd like a different building other than Brookins, but, you know, we just don't have that money. We don't have the wherewithal to do that overnight because there's so many issues here with space, heating and ventilation. But what we had Kirk do, and we got to start where we can, I go back to that, we had him identify the equipment that was aging, that needed replaced. Whether or not that jail gets built onto, whether or not that jail's there 50 years from now, that water heater, within the next short period of time, 2 to 3 years, is going to need replaced. Now, we can sit here all day and say, well, you know, we got to look at the big picture. Are we going to put up a wall? Are we going to have more inmates? We're going to need a bigger water heater. We're going to need a smaller water heater. That has nothing to do with the water heater's bad and we got to replace it. So the work that they have done and they were directed to do has hit where we wanted it to. We can't play that game. We got to have a bigger overview of everything until that time comes. We got to take care of what we have now, today, much like we do our vehicles, our houses, and everything else every day. I understand what you're saying. They're going to get there, but like I said earlier, it's not going to come to play until we can get all these other things resolved, and then we'll march forward. But we're going to have equipment failures along the line, and if we're not prepared, we're at their whim. We are at their whim, and it's better to be prepared. Any other questions?
Good job, Gary.
Anything else? Chair's report. I've spoke so much tonight, I'm not going to give one. Isn't that great? Designation of items to be placed on the consent agenda, none. And I declare this meeting adjourned.